My son wrote, "Don't expect me to take care of you in old age. I have my own life and family." I silently nodded and changed my will. The next morning, he burst into my house and, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I had done everything right. 43 years of marriage to Harold, 2 children raised in a White House on Elmwood Drive in Beaverton, Ohio, a vegetable garden in the backyard, church on Sundays, pot roast on Fridays. When Harold died 7 years ago from a heart attack in the kitchen, just stood up from his chair and was gone before he hit the floor, I grieved, I cried, I sold his truck, and then I kept living. Because that's what you do. You keep living. My daughter Patricia lives in Portland with her husband and their 2 kids. She calls every Sunday, visits at Thanksgiving, sends cards on my birthday with a little handwritten note inside. She is not rich, she is not glamorous, but she is present, and presence, I have learned, is the only currency that actually matters. My son Derek lives 20 minutes away. He used to visit often, back when Harold was alive, and the house smelled like fresh-cut grass, and there was money flowing easily. Derek would sit at the kitchen table, drink my coffee, talk about his business ideas, always another business idea, and leave with a check tucked in his jacket pocket. A loan, he always called it. I never called it back. He married Tiffany 12 years ago. She is a pretty woman with sharp eyes and a laugh that sounds rehearsed. She calls me Mom, but has never once asked me how I was sleeping, whether my knee still ached in the cold, or what I thought about anything at all. She talks about their house. They bought a large colonial in Westerville, about their vacations, about the renovation they were planning for the master bath. She talks the way people talk when they want you to understand what their life costs. Their daughter Emma is 19 now, a sophomore at Ohio State. She is the best thing Derek ever did, and I mean that plainly and without insult. Emma calls me on Tuesday evenings. She comes over on Saturday mornings and eats my scrambled eggs and tells me about her classes and her friends and a boy she is not sure about. I look at her face and see Harold's cheekbones, and I am grateful. For a while, things felt manageable. I had my routine, my house, my garden, my Tuesday calls with Emma. I had 72 years of a life well examined, if not always well lived. I thought I understood my family. I was wrong. The first sign came 14 months before everything fell apart, though I did not recognize it as a sign at the time. Derek came over on a Wednesday afternoon. Unusual, he rarely visited midweek. And he walked through the house in a way I had not noticed before, not admiring it, measuring it. He paused at the entrance to the living room and looked at the ceiling. He opened the coat closet briefly, then closed it. He stood in the kitchen and glanced at the window above the sink with an expression I cannot fully describe, except to say it was the expression of a man calculating square footage. "Just checking in," he said. I made him coffee. We talked about nothing. He left. The second sign came 3 months later, when Tiffany mentioned, quite casually, over Easter dinner, that a house 2 streets over had sold for $410,000. She said it the way you say something you have been waiting to say. She watched my face when she said it. I changed the subject. The third sign was the loudest, and it came on a Tuesday evening in September, 9 months ago. Derek called. Not Emma, Derek. And the call lasted 11 minutes. He told me that he and Tiffany had been discussing the future. My future. He said with a careful, neutral voice that they wanted to make sure I was thinking ahead. He used the phrase, "when the time comes," 4 times. He suggested I speak with a financial advisor. He mentioned, briefly, that they had been looking at some properties, just looking, near their neighborhood. Senior living communities. Independent living, he said, as if the word independent was a gift he was offering me. I told him I was not interested. He told me I was being stubborn. And then, this is the part I return to, the part I keep turning over like a stone in my hand. He said, "Mom, you need to be realistic. I have my own life, my own family. You can't expect me to drop everything to take care of you when you get older." That's not fair to Tiffany. That's not fair to us. I was sitting in my kitchen. The light over the stove was on, casting that pale yellow glow I have always found comforting. My tea was going cold. I looked at the wall where Harold's photograph hangs. Him in his fishing hat, squinting into the sun, smiling that wide, unguarded smile. And I felt something settle in my chest. Not grief, not anger. Something quieter and more decisive. I understand, I said. I did not cry. I did not argue. I simply sat with what I had just heard and let it become real. My son had just told me I was on my own. What I did next surprised even me. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark in the bedroom Harold and I had shared for 31 years, and I looked at the ceiling, and I did what I have always done when something is too large to hold all at once. I broke it into parts. Part 1. What had Derek actually said? He had said he could not be expected to care for me in my old age. He had said it was not fair to Tiffany. He had said I needed to be realistic. He had not said he loved me. He had not said he was sorry for bringing it up this way, over the phone, without warning, without gentleness. He had stated terms. The way you state terms in a negotiation. Part 2. What did Derek stand to inherit? The house on Elmwood Drive, which Tiffany had just told me was worth over $400,000, possibly more. Harold's life insurance, which I had invested conservatively over 7 years, approximately $230,000 in a Vanguard account. A small piece of land in rural Pennsylvania that Harold's father had left us, roughly 12 acres, worth perhaps $60,000. A 2019 Subaru. The furniture, the silver, the jewelry, somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000, depending on the market. Part 3. What was currently in my will? I had written my will in 2019, 2 years after Harold died, with a lawyer named Gerald Whitman, whose office was downtown and smelled of old paper and good intentions. I had split everything equally between Derek and Patricia. 50-50. Simple. Clean. The way Harold would have wanted it. I lay there in the dark and I thought, Derek knows this. He has known this for years. And what I understood now, fully, finally, without the soft filter of maternal hope, was that Derek's relationship with me had become, at some point I could not precisely identify, a financial arrangement in his mind. I was not his mother. I was the custodian of an asset he was waiting to collect. The fear came then. Not fear of Derek exactly. Fear of my own blindness. How long had this been true? How many of those visits, those coffees, those easy conversations had been, on his side, maintenance work? Keeping the asset warm? I thought about Tiffany's eyes at Easter dinner, watching my face when she mentioned the sale price 2 streets over. I thought about Derek walking through my house on that Wednesday in July, pausing at the coat closet, looking at the kitchen window. They had been planning. I got up at 4 a.m. and made myself tea and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. Harold had been a practical man, an engineer, and he had taught me the value of writing things down. If it's in your head, he used to say, it's a worry. If it's on paper, it's a problem. And problems have solutions. I started writing. I wrote down the value of the estate as best I could estimate it. I wrote down the names of everyone I trusted. Patricia's name was at the top. Emma's name was below it. My friend Dolores, who had been my neighbor for 22 years and who brought me soup when I had the flu and never asked for anything. My pastor, Reverend Mullen, who had presided at Harold's funeral and still called me every few months to check in. Then I wrote Derek's name, and I stared at it for a long time. He was my son. I had nursed him through pneumonia at age 4. I had driven him to baseball practice for 6 years. I had co-signed his first business loan. I had sat beside Harold at Derek's wedding and cried the way mothers cry at weddings, from a fullness that has nowhere else to go. He was my son, and I loved him. But love, I was learning, does not require you to fund someone who has written you off. The plan was not complicated. I did not need it to be complicated. It had 3 parts. First, I would contact Gerald Whitman and change my will. Not impulsively, not in anger, but thoughtfully and legally and with full documentation of my mental clarity at the time of signing. The house would go to Emma. The investment account would be split between Patricia and 2 charities Harold had supported in his lifetime: the local food bank and the Children's Hospital in Columbus. The Pennsylvania land would go to Patricia outright. Derek would receive nothing. Second, I would tell no one. Not yet. Not Patricia, not Emma, not Dolores. I would keep this private until the paperwork was signed and filed, because I knew that if Derek caught even a whisper of what I was doing, he would act. And I did not yet know the full shape of what he was capable of. Third, I would document everything, every call, every visit, every comment about the house, about my health, about senior living communities. I would write dates and times in a notebook I would keep in the drawer beneath Harold's photograph. Evidence, if it ever came to that. I called Gerald Whitman's office at 9 o'clock the next morning when they opened. His assistant, a patient woman named Renee, told me Mr. Whitman had an opening Thursday afternoon. I'll take it, I said. I sat back down at the kitchen table with my cold tea and looked out the window at the garden. The last of the summer tomatoes were still on the vine, a little past their best, but still holding on. So was I. Gerald Whitman's office was exactly as I remembered it. The dark wood paneling, the framed diplomas behind his desk, the faint smell of old paper that I had always found oddly reassuring. He was a careful man in his late 60s, precise with language, unhurried in his manner, the kind of lawyer who reads every word and charges you for the privilege. I sat down in the leather chair across from his desk and told him what I wanted. He listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the desk, his expression neutral in the practiced way of lawyers and doctors and people who have heard difficult things many times before. When I finished, he asked me several questions. Was I under any pressure to make these changes? No. Had anyone threatened me or offered me inducements? No. Had I discussed this with my other beneficiaries? Not yet. He made notes. He asked about Emma's age, 19, and explained that since she was an adult, the bequest to her was straightforward. He explained the specifics of how the land transfer to Patricia would work, the tax implications, the timeline. Then he looked up from his notes and said, "Marjorie, you understand that once this is filed, it becomes a legal document, and while you can always change it again, the current version will be the operative will unless you do so." "I understand," I said. "And you're certain?" I thought about Derek's voice on the phone, the flat, administrative tone. "That's not fair to Tiffany. That's not fair to us." "I'm certain," I said. We scheduled a signing appointment for the following Thursday. I drove home on the highway with the radio off, thinking. It was the following Monday that I received the first real evidence. Not a suspicion, not a chill on my neck, but a concrete, documentable fact. And it arrived in the form of an envelope. The postal carrier had misdelivered it. It was addressed to Derek Haywood at his home address on Stonebridge Road, but it had been placed in my mailbox, presumably because we share a last name, and the carrier had made an error. I almost drove it over to his house without opening it. Almost. It was from a real estate agency called Premier Property Solutions. The return address was Columbus. Inside was a single sheet of paper, professionally formatted, with a header that read, "Preliminary Property Valuation Summary." Below that, property, 14 Elmwood Drive, Beaverton, Ohio. Below that, an estimated market valuation, a brief assessment of the property's condition and lot size, and a note that read, "As discussed with client D. Haywood, attached. Please find projected net proceeds following standard commission and closing costs." My house, my address, Derek's name as the client. I sat in my car in the driveway and read it twice. He had contacted a real estate agency to value my house. He had done it, as best I could tell from the date stamp on the letter, 6 weeks ago. while I was still alive, while I was still living in it. He had not mentioned it to me. He had not asked my permission. He had simply initiated a valuation as if the property were already his to assess. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and placed the envelope on the surface in front of me. I took my notebook from the drawer beneath Harold's photograph and wrote the date, the time, and a description of the document. Then I put the letter in the plastic folder I had bought at Walgreens the day after I called Gerald Whitman's office. Evidence folder, already 2 weeks old and already necessary. That evening, Derek called. It was a short call, 5 minutes, unremarkable on its surface. He asked how I was feeling. I said fine. He mentioned that Tiffany had been thinking about having me over for dinner soon. I said that sounded nice. He said he hoped I was thinking about my long-term situation. I said I was always thinking about my long-term situation. He paused at that, just a half-second pause, and then said goodbye. I sat with the phone in my hand after he hung up and asked myself, does he know I've contacted Gerald? No, he couldn't. Renee was a professional, and Gerald's office had no reason to contact Derek. But he was watching, checking in more than usual. Tiffany had texted me twice that week, once to share a recipe, once to ask if my hip had been bothering me. Small contacts, innocuous individually, but together, forming a pattern of surveillance dressed up as concern. Was I being paranoid? I genuinely considered the possibility. I was 72 years old, and I was sitting alone in my kitchen, building an evidence folder and listening for meaning in brief phone calls. That sounded, on the surface, like the behavior of a woman tilting toward suspicion. But then I looked at the Premier Property Solutions letter. Number 1, I was not being paranoid. I went to bed early, read for an hour, and turned out the light. Before I fell asleep, I thought about Emma, who was coming over Saturday morning for scrambled eggs, and would tell me about the boy she was not sure about. I would not tell Emma any of this yet. She was 19, and she loved her father, and she deserved to remain outside this for as long as possible. But I would remember that she was the person I was protecting the house for. The second Thursday arrived gray and cold, the sky the flat white of Ohio in October. I dressed carefully that morning, not out of vanity, but because I had learned, in 72 years, that how you present yourself shapes how you are received. And I intended to be received as a woman of full and clear mind. I wore my dark blue dress, Harold's pearl brooch at the collar, low heels. I did my hair. I looked in the bathroom mirror and said out loud to myself and to Harold's photograph on the dresser, I know exactly what I'm doing. Gerald Whitman's assistant Renee had the documents ready. Gerald and I reviewed them together, clause by clause, unhurried. He had prepared everything correctly. The house to Emma in full, the investment account divided between Patricia and the 2 charities, the Pennsylvania land to Patricia, the Subaru to the Beaverton Food Bank's delivery program. Derek's name did not appear anywhere in the document. I signed on every line where Gerald placed a small yellow arrow. Renee witnessed. Gerald notarized. He handed me a copy in a sealed envelope and told me the original would be filed and stored securely. That's it? I asked. That's it, he said. I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out into the parking lot. The cold air was sharp. I stood beside my Subaru for a moment and breathed it in. It took Derek 4 days to find out. I do not know precisely how. My best reconstruction is this. Derek, growing suspicious after my increasingly neutral phone manner, called Patricia. Patricia, who knew nothing of the will change, said something that inadvertently confirmed I had been in contact with Gerald Whitman. Perhaps she mentioned I had called her about legal matters, or perhaps Derek guessed, and she did not deny it firmly enough. Patricia called me that evening, flustered, saying Derek had asked strange questions about my plans, and she wasn't sure what she had said. The following morning, a Sunday, Derek came to my house without calling first. I heard his car in the driveway and watched through the front window as he came up the walk. His face was tight, Tiffany was in the passenger seat. She had not gotten out, which told me this visit had been calculated. Her presence in the car was pressure, not participation. I opened the door before he could knock. "Derek," I said. "We need to talk," he said. I let him in. I did not offer coffee. He stood in the living room, the same room he had measured with his eyes 14 months ago. And he told me he had heard I had been to see a lawyer. His voice was controlled, but there was something running underneath it, a current of agitation. He asked if I had changed the will. I looked at him for a moment. My son, 48 years old, standing in my living room on a Sunday morning, demanding to know what I had done with my own property. "Derek," I said, "my will is my business." His voice shifted. "Mom, I'm trying to protect you. There are people who take advantage of older women who live alone. Gerald Whitman is expensive, and he doesn't have your best interests at heart. He has his fee in mind. If you've made changes without consulting anyone—" "I consulted my attorney," I said. "That's who one consults about legal matters." "What did you do?" His voice was louder now. "Did you cut me out? Is that what this is?" "I think you should leave. This is insane." He stepped closer. Not threatening, precisely, but the movement was not gentle either. "That house is worth nearly $500,000. Do you understand what you're doing? You're going to hand it over to who? Emma? Emma is 19 years old. She can't manage a property. You're going to give it to Patricia, who lives in Oregon and doesn't even come home for Christmas half the time? This is irrational, Mom. This is... I'm telling you right now, I will contest this. I have grounds, diminished capacity, undue influence. On what basis? I asked. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. He opened his mouth and closed it. I signed a legal document in an attorney's office with full witness and notarization, I said. I was dressed, coherent, and arrived by myself in my own car. Gerald Whitman has been practicing for 30 years and will testify to my full mental clarity. If you contest this, you will spend money on lawyers and you will lose, and I will make sure Emma knows exactly why you lost. That last sentence landed. I saw it on his face. He left. He walked out without another word, got into the car where Tiffany was waiting, and drove away. I stood in the doorway and watched the car until it turned off Elmwood Drive and disappeared. Then I closed the door, walked to the kitchen, and sat down. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, from adrenaline. There is a difference. I knew the difference. I called Dolores next door and asked if she wanted to have tea. She said yes immediately and came over in 10 minutes in her yellow cardigan, and we sat at my kitchen table, and I told her I had just had a hard morning and she did not press me for more than that. We drank tea and talked about her grandchildren and the book club and the problem with the squirrels getting into her bird feeder, and I felt, slowly, the trembling stop. I gave myself 4 days. I did not call Derek. I did not call Patricia to explain. I gardened, I read, I cooked a proper dinner each evening, I walked to the end of the street and back in the cold afternoon light. I let myself be quiet. On the 4th day, I felt ready. On the 5th day, Tiffany called. Not Derek, Tiffany, which told me they had discussed strategy and concluded that Derek's approach on Sunday had failed, and a softer instrument was required. Tiffany's voice on the phone was warm and smooth, the voice she used at holiday dinners when she wanted something to appear effortless. She said she was calling because she was worried about me. She said Derek had come home very upset on Sunday, and she wanted me to know that his concern came from love, not from, and here she paused, delicately, anything else. She said they both just wanted to make sure I was protected. She said it was hard for children to watch their parents get older and make decisions that might not be fully. Another delicate pause, considered. I let her talk. I made no sound except an occasional to indicate I was still on the line. When she finished, I said, "Tiffany, I appreciate the call. We just want to sit down with you," she said. "As a family, no lawyers, no documents, just a conversation." I'll think about it, I said. I had no intention of thinking about it. After I hung up, I sat for a moment and noticed, with some interest, that I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not the faint, sick guilt that used to accompany any conflict with Derek. Just clarity. Like a window that had been fogged for a long time and was now, finally, clean. Was there a version of this where Tiffany's concern was genuine? Where Derek's anger was really grief? A son fearing loss, reacting badly, capable of remorse and change? I turned it over, honestly. I had known Derek for 48 years. I had watched him react to disappointment since he was 4 years old. He did not absorb it and grow from it. He waited for the obstacle to be removed or wore it down through persistence. The anger in my living room on Sunday had not been the anger of a hurt child. It had been the anger of a man who believes something is owed to him and has found it withheld. I knew my son. It was Emma who gave me the social ground I needed. Not that she knew she was doing it. She came over that Saturday as usual, eggs and coffee, and I looked at her face across the table and decided, carefully, to tell her a portion of the truth. Not everything, but enough so that she was not blindsided later. I told her that I had updated my legal documents as people my age should do periodically, and that I had spoken with my lawyer. I told her that some of the decisions I had made might surprise her father. I told her that whatever she heard from her parents' side of this, she should know that I had made my decisions with full clarity and with love, and that I had made them for reasons that were mine to hold. Emma set down her fork and looked at me with Harold's eyes. "Grandma," she said, "whatever you decided, I trust you." I had to look out the window for a moment. I also called Patricia that week and told her more fully what had happened. The phone call in September, the property valuation letter, the Sunday confrontation. Patricia was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Mom, I'm so sorry I didn't see this sooner." She did not ask about the will. She did not ask what she had been left. She asked whether I was safe and whether I needed her to come. That, I thought, is the difference between my two children. Dolores, who had lived next door for 22 years and who had known Harold and who had no stake in my estate whatsoever, became my quiet anchor through this period. She came over twice that week with no agenda other than company. She had been through her own version of family difficulty, a brother who had contested her mother's estate years ago, and she did not offer advice I had not asked for. She simply sat with me. Sometimes the most sustaining thing a person can offer is just their steady, undemanding presence. Reverend Mullen called on Wednesday, as he did every few months. I told him I was managing a family difficulty. He asked if I wanted to talk about it. I said not yet, but I thanked him. He said I knew where he was. I did know, and knowing was enough. By the end of that week, I had something I had not had in September when Derek's voice had come through the phone flat and administrative in the dark. I had people. Patricia, who knew the full picture and was standing behind me quietly from Portland. Emma, who trusted me without asking for reasons. Dolores, who showed up with tea and no agenda. Reverend Mullen, a phone call away. Derek and Tiffany were watching and waiting. I could feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. A pressure in the atmosphere. A stillness that is not peace. Let them watch, I thought. I was ready. They came on a Saturday, 3 weeks after the Sunday confrontation, and they brought a casserole. That detail still strikes me, even now. A casserole dish covered in foil, something with chicken and rice, carried up my front walk by Tiffany in a cream-colored sweater. Derek, just behind her, with his hands in his pockets and his face arranged into an expression of careful humility. I watched them from the window before I opened the door. They had rehearsed this, I was certain. Not necessarily in explicit conversation, but in the way couples rehearse things without speaking, calibrating their approach through shared glances and assumed understanding. I let them in. I put the casserole on the kitchen counter without offering to heat it. I made coffee because it was the right thing to do, and I would not be made impolite by their bad behavior. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had made my list on the legal pad, where I had drunk my cold tea in the dark, where Harold had sat for 31 years in the chair to my left, and Tiffany started talking. She had prepared an approach that I recognized as sophisticated, which gave me a grudging moment of respect for the effort, even as I cataloged each move as it was made. Move 1. Acknowledgement. Derek said he knew he had come on too strong last month. He said he was sorry for raising his voice. He said he had been stressed about work. There had been complications with a contractor, money had been tight, and he had not handled things well. The apology was fluent and contained just enough specificity about external pressures to sound genuine. Move 2. Reframing. Tiffany took over. She said they weren't here to argue about the will. They understood I had the right to do whatever I chose with my property. They respected that. But, and here was the pivot, they were worried about the people I had been listening to. She mentioned Patricia gently, noting that Patricia lived far away and didn't really understand the day-to-day realities of my situation. She mentioned Gerald Whitman by name, suggesting, very carefully, that lawyers sometimes encourage changes in documents because it generated more billable work. She did not say this crudely. She said it with the voice of a daughter-in-law who was simply, reluctantly, sharing a concern. Move 3. The offer. Derek leaned forward. He said he wanted to make a proposal. What if I considered a shared arrangement? The house could be placed in a family trust, not transferred outright, just restructured, which would protect it from probate, from taxes, from complications. He and Tiffany would be co-trustees. This would give me security, give Emma stability, and protect the asset for the whole family. I looked at him across my kitchen table. My son, 48 years old, leaning forward with his hands flat on Harold's table, proposing that I hand him legal authority over my house while I was still in it. Derek, I said, who drafted this proposal? He blinked. We just talked it through ourselves. Because what you're describing is a revocable living trust with you and Tiffany as successor co-trustees, I said. That's a specific legal structure. Have you spoken to an attorney? Another blink. We've done some research. I see. I picked up my coffee cup. I won't be doing that. Tiffany's warmth shifted, just slightly, like a lamp dimming. Mom, we're trying to help you. I know you are, I said, and I've heard you. My answer is no. Derek set his jaw. The rehearsed humility dropped, not completely, but enough. You're going to end up alone, he said. You understand that? Patricia isn't going to fly in from Portland every time you fall down in the garden. Emma is 20. She has her own life ahead of her. You're cutting off the people who are right here, 20 minutes away. And yet, I said, you've told me not to count on you. Silence. You said those words to me, Derek. On the phone, in September. You said you had your own life and your own family, and I couldn't expect you to care for me. I wrote it down. I have the date and time. The color in his face changed. You were recording me? His voice went flat. I was taking notes, I said, which any sensible person does when they're told by their son that they're on their own. Tiffany touched Derek's arm. A signal. They had a threshold and they had just reached it, and she was calling the retreat. Derek stood up. His voice was controlled again, but there was something in his eyes now. Not anger exactly. Something colder. This isn't over, he said. I know, I said. They left. The casserole sat on my counter getting cold. I locked the front door and stood in the hallway for a moment and let myself feel the fear, because it was there, and denying it would have been foolish. This isn't over. He was right about that. A man who believes $400,000 is being taken from him does not simply accept it. But the fear, when I let myself stand in it, had a surprising texture. It was not paralyzing, it was informing. It told me, this is real. He will act. You need to be more prepared than you currently are. I walked to the kitchen, opened my notebook, and wrote down the date and time and everything that had been said. Every move, every word, every change in Tiffany's voice. Then I called Gerald Whitman's office and left a message asking him to call me first thing Monday morning. I had a question about what legal options someone might pursue to challenge a will, and what documentation I should be assembling now, before anything was filed, to make sure any such challenge would fail completely. Gerald Whitman called me back Monday morning at 8:55, 5 minutes before his office officially opened. That small fact told me something. He had received my message and understood it was not routine. Over the following 2 weeks, we had 3 appointments. In the first, I brought my notebook and Gerald's associate, a younger woman named Christine Bird, who specialized in elder law and estate litigation, took careful notes while I described the sequence of events: the September phone call, the property valuation letter, the Sunday confrontation, and the Saturday visit with the casserole and the trust proposal. Christine asked me precise questions. Had Derek ever had power of attorney? No. Had he ever had a joint account with me? No. Was there any document in existence that gave him any legal authority over my property or my finances? No. None. She looked at the Premier Property Solutions letter, which I had brought in its plastic sleeve, and wrote something down. In the second appointment, Gerald explained the landscape. A will contest in Ohio required grounds, typically undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, fraud, or improper execution. He told me my documentation of mental clarity at signing, combined with Renee's witness and his own testimony, made a capacity challenge very weak. A claim of undue influence would require Derek to demonstrate that someone had overridden my free will. Difficult to argue when the change moved assets away from the alleged influencer's family, not toward them. Frankly, Gerald said, your son is in a poor legal position, and I suspect any attorney he consults will tell him so. But in the third appointment, Christine told me something new. Derek had contacted an attorney. His name was Robert Page, a Columbus litigator. He had sent Gerald's office a formal letter requesting a copy of my current will on behalf of his client, Derek Haywood, who had reason to believe the document had been executed under conditions of undue influence. The letter was politely worded and legally thin, Christine said. But it was a move. He's filing for a guardianship hearing, she said. Not a will contest yet, and that comes after. This is the first step. He wants the court to declare you legally incapable of managing your own affairs. I looked at her across the conference table. Outside the window, Columbus traffic moved steadily through the November gray. On what basis? I asked. The filing cites concerns about your isolation, your susceptibility to outside influence, and what he describes as recent erratic changes in long-standing legal arrangements. She paused. It also contains a statement from a Dr. Frederick Almore, listed as your primary care physician. I frowned. Frederick Almore has not been my physician for 3 years. I switched to Dr. Karen Price in 2022. Christine looked at her notes. Dr. Almore's statement describes you as showing signs of age-related cognitive decline during a visit in 2021. In 2021, I had a sinus infection, I said. Christine's expression remained professionally neutral, but I saw something shift behind her eyes. Do you have a current relationship with Dr. Price? I see her every 6 months. My last appointment was August. I'll need a letter from her, Christine said. And I'll need you to consent to a neuropsychological evaluation. Not because I doubt you, but because I want it on record before this hearing that you scored in the normal range for your age. If we can put that evaluation in front of a judge alongside Dr. Price's letter and Gerald's testimony from the signing, Page's filing will have nothing to stand on. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in December. I arrived at the Franklin County Courthouse with Christine and with Patricia, who had flown in from Portland the night before. I had not asked her to come. She had called and said she was coming, and I had let her. We sat in the corridor outside the hearing room, and Patricia held my hand, and I looked at the marble floor and thought about Harold, who would have been furious and precise and would have written everything down in his engineer's handwriting and then gone home and made dinner as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I tried to borrow some of that from him, Derek and Tiffany arrived with Robert Page. Tiffany was dressed formally, which told me she had thought about appearances. Derek did not look at me when they walked past. Inside the hearing room, Christine presented the neuropsychological evaluation. I had scored in the upper range for my age cohort on every measure. She presented the letter from Dr. Price, who had examined me 8 weeks ago and found no cognitive impairment whatsoever. She presented Gerald Whitman's signed account of the will signing, including his professional judgment that I had been clear, deliberate, and fully oriented at the time of signing. Then Christine presented the Premier Property Solutions letter. There was a pause in the room. The judge, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked at the letter and then looked at Robert Page and asked him to explain why his client had initiated a market valuation of his mother's property without her knowledge, while simultaneously pursuing a guardianship petition on grounds of her diminished capacity. Page began a response about good faith concerns for a parent's welfare. The judge removed her glasses. "Counsel," she said, "your client's actions appear to reflect anticipatory estate management rather than filial concern. A guardianship petition requires evidence that the respondent is incapable of caring for herself. I have before me a neuropsychological evaluation, a letter from her current treating physician, the professional attestation of a 30-year estate attorney, and a woman who arrived here today under her own power, and is sitting at that table with complete comprehension of these proceedings." She looked toward Derek. "What I do not have is a single piece of credible clinical evidence of incapacity." Derek's face was very still. "What I do have," the judge continued, "is evidence suggesting a financial motivation behind this petition. I am inclined to deny it." She denied it. We walked out of the courthouse into the cold December afternoon, and Patricia put her arm through mine, and we stood on the steps for a moment, and neither of us said anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said just yet. Derek came out behind us with Tiffany and Robert Page. He stopped a few feet away. He looked at me, and his face held something I had not seen before. Not anger, not calculation. Something collapsed in it, like a structure that had lost its load-bearing wall. I looked back at him steadily. Then Patricia and I walked to the car. In the weeks after the hearing, Derek attempted 2 more approaches. The first was through Patricia. He called her the week after the courthouse and told her I was acting irrationally, that I had been influenced by Gerald Whitman, and by her, that the family was being destroyed by a simple misunderstanding that could be resolved if everyone sat down together. Patricia told him she had been at the hearing, had seen the evidence, and had no interest in sitting down. She called me afterward and described the conversation in the careful, precise way she does things, and I wrote down the date in my notebook and thought, he is running out of moves. The second approach came as a formal letter from Robert Page. It was addressed to Christine and offered a settlement. Derek would withdraw all legal action in exchange for a negotiated bequest. He proposed 20% of the estate's total value, citing his years as a nearby family member and his reasonable expectation of inheritance. Christine called me and read it to me over the phone in a neutral, information-delivering tone. "What would you like to do?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "He'll likely withdraw without response," she said. "He has no remaining legal grounds, and Page would have told him so after the hearing." "Then he'll withdraw," I said. He withdrew. Page sent a formal notice 2 weeks later. All proceedings dropped, no further action to be taken. Christine filed it and sent me a copy, and that was, legally speaking, the end of it. I held that single sheet of paper for a long moment at my kitchen table. It was unremarkable to look at. Standard letterhead, formal language, 2 short paragraphs. But I had spent the better part of 6 months moving carefully and deliberately toward this piece of paper, and I felt its weight more than its words. I thought about the legal pad I had filled in the dark at 4 a.m, the evidence folder in its plastic sleeve, the morning I had dressed in my blue dress and Harold's pearl brooch and told my reflection I knew exactly what I was doing. All of it had led here, to this quiet Tuesday afternoon, to this single page that said, "It's over." I put the letter in the plastic folder with everything else and placed it in the drawer beneath Harold's photograph. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it was part of the record. It was true, and true things deserve to be kept, but the personal end of it came a little differently. 3 weeks after the withdrawal, Derek came to my house alone. No Tiffany in the car, no rehearsed expression. He rang the doorbell, and when I opened the door, he looked like a man who had not been sleeping well, which I did not think he deserved sympathy for, but which I could see clearly. He asked if he could come in. I considered it for a moment and then stepped back from the door. He sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee because that is what I do, and I set a cup in front of him. He did not start with an apology. He started with a question. "Did you always know?" he asked. "About me, about what I was doing." I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Not always," I said. "But long enough." He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "I convinced myself it wasn't greed," he said. "I told myself I was being practical, that I was planning ahead, that you were being sentimental and impractical, and that I was the one seeing clearly." "I know," I said. "I think I believed it," he said. "That's the part I keep. I think I actually believed it." I looked at my son. 48 years old. Hollowed out in some way that he would have to live with for a long time, possibly the rest of his life, because he had looked at his mother's home and seen an asset, and his mother had seen exactly what he had done. And now, there was no undoing the clarity on either side. There was a long silence between us. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but weighted. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car passed slowly on Elmwood Drive. I thought about all the years we had sat at this table when Derek was young, when Harold was alive, when the house was full of ordinary noise, and I had not yet needed to know what my son was made of. Those years had been real. They could not be unmade, but they could not be returned to either. Some distances, once crossed, simply become the new geography. "Derek," I said, "I love you. That has not changed. But I will not be returning to the relationship we had before September. You told me not to count on you. I believed you and I acted accordingly. The will stands." He nodded. He was not going to argue. I could see that. He drank the coffee and he stayed for 20 minutes and we talked about nothing in particular. The weather, a road construction project on the highway, a television series someone had told him to watch. The conversation of two people who have said what needed to be said and are now learning to exist in the space that remains. When he left, he did not say goodbye at the door the way he used to, with a quick squeeze of my shoulder. He just said thank you and walked to his car. I watched him drive away. Then I went back to the kitchen, poured out the rest of my coffee, and stood at the window looking at the garden. The November soil was cold and bare. In spring, I would plant again. Tomatoes, the climbing beans Harold always liked, zinnias along the south fence for the bees. The house was quiet. It was mine. The legal documents were filed and secure in Gerald Whitman's office. Emma would inherit it someday, in what I hoped was a very long time, and she would walk through the rooms and remember her Saturday mornings here, the scrambled eggs and the coffee, and the boy she had not been sure about. The food bank would receive a share of Harold's careful savings. The Children's Hospital in Columbus would receive another. Patricia would have the Pennsylvania land. Everything was, at last, arranged exactly as it should be. I washed the 2 coffee cups and put them away. Spring came early that year, which felt, though I am not a superstitious person, like a small gift. The garden recovered before I did, in the way gardens do, quietly and without drama. The soil responding to warmth before anything visible happened above it. I planted in March, earlier than I should have, and lost only 2 of the tomato seedlings to a late frost, which is better than average. By May, the climbing beans had reached the top of the trellis Harold had built in 2003 from cedar posts and wire, and I stood at the kitchen window in the morning with my coffee and watched them move in the breeze and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. Patricia came for a full 2 weeks in June. She slept in the guest room, and we cooked together every night and watched old films and went to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, and it was the best visit we had ever had, because for the first time, there was nothing between us that needed to be managed or avoided. She cried once, briefly, on a Thursday evening, saying she was sorry it had taken all of this to make her understand how much she had taken our closeness for granted. I told her not to be sorry. I told her she was here. Emma graduated from Ohio State the following May, 2 years after everything, with a degree in environmental science. She had a job offer already from a conservation nonprofit in Columbus, a real position with a salary and benefits, the kind of start that fills a grandmother's heart with a very particular pride. At the graduation dinner, she sat next to me and leaned her head briefly against my shoulder, the way she had done at 7 years old, and I thought, Harold would have loved this moment so much he would have had to leave the table for a minute. Dolores and I started a habit of Sunday dinners, alternating houses, which we had talked about for years without doing, and which turned out to be one of the best decisions either of us made. She was a better cook than I was. I had a better wine collection, left over from Harold's careful purchases over the years. We were, between us, well provisioned. Reverend Mullen organized a small tutoring program at the church for children who needed reading help, and I volunteered every Tuesday afternoon. 3rd and 4th graders sitting across from me at folding tables in the fellowship hall, sounding out words. After 43 years of teaching, I had thought I was done with classrooms. I was not. There is something about watching a child read a sentence they couldn't read the week before that I have never been able to find elsewhere. Life was, in the simplest and most accurate sense, good. Derek and Tiffany I learned through Emma over time, and not through gossip. Emma was not a gossip, but through natural account. We're managing a difficult period. The business problems Derek had mentioned at the kitchen table, which I had assumed were a manipulation, turned out to be real. A contractor dispute had become a lawsuit, which he had partially won and partially lost, incurring significant legal costs. He had taken a second mortgage on the Stonebridge Roadhouse in the previous year to cover expenses. This I did not know until Emma mentioned carefully that her parents were going through some financial stress. Tiffany had reduced her own hours at the salon she co-owned to manage costs. I did not feel satisfied by this. I want to be precise about that, because the easy version of this story would include some satisfaction, and I think honesty matters more than narrative neatness. I felt something more complicated, a kind of heavy recognition that Derek's difficulties were real and that he had created most of them himself, and that there was nothing I could or should do about that, and that the love I had for my son did not require me to rescue him from consequences he had earned. Emma saw her father occasionally. The relationship was strained, as she told me once directly, in the way she had of being direct. He had not apologized to her for putting her grandmother through what he had put her through. He had not explained or accounted for it. He had simply continued forward as people do, carrying the weight of what they have done without quite acknowledging it. Emma was patient with him the way young people are sometimes patient with their parents, not with illusions, but with a kind of clear-eyed acceptance. She came to see me most Saturdays, my Emma. Still the scrambled eggs, still the coffee, though sometimes now she brought pastries from a bakery near her apartment. She was full of her work, a watershed project, a school outreach program, a grant application she was helping to write. She talked, and I listened and occasionally said something useful, and mostly just was glad to be in the same room with her. One Saturday, in early fall, she arrived with a young man she had mentioned, cautiously, over several months. He was tall and quiet, and thanked me for the coffee twice, and helped clear the dishes without being asked. Harold used to say you could tell everything you needed to know about a person from how they behaved in someone else's kitchen. By that measure, Emma had made a very good choice. After they left, I sat in the quiet kitchen in the low afternoon light and thought about all of it. The September phone call, the evidence folder, the hearing room, the coffee cups, the signing with the yellow arrows. And what I felt, most of all, was not triumph. It was something calmer and more durable than triumph. I was here, in my house, in my garden, in my life, on my own terms. I was 74 years old, and I was exactly where I had decided to be. That was enough, more than enough. I have thought many times since all of this about what I would tell a woman sitting in her kitchen with cold tea, listening to her son tell her she is on her own. Believe him, not in bitterness, in clarity. When someone shows you who they are, accept the information. Your name on a legal document is a language some conversations can only be held in. Use it while you still can. And the people who show up without being asked, they are the inheritance that matters most. What would you have done? Tell me in the comments. Thank you for listening.